Welcome back. Well, now we do have Dr. Tunde Irukara here with us. He is the Chief Executive of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. That's the FCCPC. It used to be the Consumer Protection Council, just in case you're wondering. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you.
Do you get the sense sometimes people struggle to say, wait, isn't it the CPC? Oh, no, you still get that?
Yes, I get that. I mean, but the bigger struggle is just that there's so many consonants, so it's FCCPC.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you think you're even stumbling. Oh, am I getting this right? But then I guess with time, they'll get used to it. But you're in Lagos for this public hearing about the unfortunate case involving Ms. Morade Balogun, who died on the 2nd of December 2019.
Correct.
But then it also has to do with this possible violation of patient and consumer rights under the Act. And wow, so many sections here. Section 17, A, E, H, I, S, Y, 18.4, sub 32. These people, this is tough. Can anybody escape this kind of scenario?
Well, in reality, at the end of the day, not each of the provisions of law are crystallized offenses that result in a potential penalty. And so what it is that the theory of any case is to look at every single provision of law where there is a relevant provision with respect to the conduct.
And importantly, conduct in this case has got to do with how she was rushed to the hospital.
Well, in reality, the totality of the investigation. So first, what it was that she was victim of a violent crime,
yeah.
And she was taken to hospital, and the allegation, the initial allegation, was that she did not receive emergency therapy on account that the hospital has requested a police report. So that's the basis of even opening the investigation. But even at the time, we were pretty clear that. Like most investigations, that the reality of it would be that it's what comes out during the investigation that would determine what could have gone wrong. So that's why what you see here is all the potential provisions. So it's not a charge. So it's not, you're not charging someone with an offense, or you haven't determined anybody has done something wrong, but you're broadening the scope of your inquiry. Right. To be sure that, so some of those provisions would also be to identify the powers of the investigator to procure information and to conduct the investigation.
You know, I'll give you a personal experience. I was at a hospital, I think it was last week, for an emergency case. And, apparently you pay higher when it's an emergency to get a card in some hospitals. Maybe we'll discuss that much later. And so we paid higher, and we expected that the patient would be attended to almost immediately. But guess what? Someone who came for a regular checkup got attended to faster than the person who came for emergency. Now, that I didn't understand that. And it begs the question also, so with this public hearing, what are you hoping to achieve? Because it will seem this happens every day.
Very good. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to escalate it to a public inquiry. Because, I mean, we've done sensitization, we did the Patient's Bill of Rights, the police have done all kinds of bulletins, the National Assembly has made a law, but we're not gaining the kind of traction that we should. And so we thought that one death is one death too much. And so we thought that we would do this. And what the hearing, the outcome is, we don't know the outcome yet. We've only just concluded hearing. So the panel would now go into deliberation, would look at the record, everything there, everything was recorded there and was verbatim recording. And so there'll be a record that'll be created and would look at it. But a few things that already jump at me, I'm not talking about what decisions have been made, but issues that arose. There's a question of our protocols. I mean, what are the appropriate protocols when there's an emergency? And what should every doctor know, regardless of where you work? I mean, and even if you were not taught in school, when you start working there, what do people do to train you, especially how to respond to emergencies and traumas? And what are the questions that are relevant based on your professional judgment? So one of the things I even learned anyway is that you've got a primary survey when a trauma is presented, and you've got a secondary survey. And so things like the patient history, even identity, or sometimes the circumstances of the injury, they belong in the secondary survey. And so if you're doing that, so obviously if everybody knows that, we all know that the question of a police report does not arise in the primary survey. And so if we can get the caregivers across the board, whether nurses or anything, to understand that whole value, that whole process sequence, then we can address it to some extent. Also, we've learned that one of the biggest and most important things that are missing in our entire value chain is the appropriate emergency intervention system. And so take, for instance, if you had an institutionalized ambulance system with the right paramedics, I think it would even diminish this question of a police report, because paramedics are trained to attempt to stabilize life. And so they're not going to go there and start asking about a police report or not. And so if she was transported by a proper ambulance and proper paramedics, by the time they got her to the hospital, whatever the hospital is, what that hospital would be looking to do would be continuation of therapy or intervention, not clerking and asking about police report. And so we found quite a few things that just jump out at me that these are the things that we should be focusing on addressing one way or the other.
Pardon me. You've talked about some of the things that jumped at you, but people are still wondering, where in the universe did it even come from that the medical practitioners or caregivers should ask for a police report? Time and again, the police have said this is not part of the thing. You start to give the care, then you inform us. The NMA has also come out to say the first thing to do is to stabilize the patient, then you can follow up. So where did it also jump at you where it came from that they had to make this demand?
That didn't jump at me yesterday because I've dealt with this for a while and I've scratched my head repeatedly. And when when the FCCPC initiated the Patient's Bill of Rights that was launched in 2018, we tried to find the history of this, because one of the key rights under the Patient's Bill of Rights is that emergency intervention should be provided regardless of law enforcement activity. But also we're trying to find, all right, in creating the Patient's Bill of Rights, would we be making a statement that is inconsistent with any prevailing law? And so we try to find the history of this, and we can find it. It's very mythical. But one of the things that I can say is that looking at each of the cases and hearing from both sides, hearing from doctors and caregivers, even good Samaritans, is that there's a law enforcement process that could have led to this assumption. And a law enforcement process that creates an apprehension in caregivers and even passers-by when they attempt to help. And I'm sure that all of that became more prevalent at a time when there was a significant insecurity and violent crime and lots of armed robbery. And so it takes a while. So the average policeman, I understand, if you, as a good Samaritan, took someone to a hospital, and the person even dies, the policeman says, well, you know what, you've got to stick around and make a statement, which is absolutely legitimate. And that's absolutely legitimate. But when you make a statement to the police and they now say to you, well, can you call somebody to come and bail you? So that becomes problematic. And so from stopping by to help, now I'm requiring bail. And so that in itself is a chilling effect on people seeking to help. And I'm sure that medical personnel, perhaps they've experienced some of these things. The last thing that should be on the mind of a doctor or any medical personnel when you're trying to save a life is worrying about your own life or your own liberty. Yeah. It should be the very last thing. It should be the absolute last thing. So I suspect that maybe a combination of all of these and some level of overzealousness many years ago when we were trying to address a key problem of excessive violent crime might have led to this, but we still have to deal with it.
Part of the narrative, which we also heard historically, was that some of them said, well, when we treated some of those people, the police would say, well, why did you treat an armed robbery suspect? And so if you did all of those things, then we had to arrest you. So that apprehension spread across a number of other people. So are you looking to see what role will the enforcement agencies play in this?
So it's much less credible to believe that the police force would attempt to apprehend a medical personnel in a hospital for providing care to anyone, whether...
No, maybe not in the process.
Yeah.
Maybe much later.
Yes, I understand, even much later. And so if the only thing that could make sense to me would be perhaps even if you're a doctor and somehow in the bush or in your home, some armed robber has come and tells you that, look, maybe the police are on the trail of that person, and they find that at some point you provided care to that person without reporting, in which case they can say maybe you're an accomplice or obstructed. But in any medical facility, I'll be hard-pressed to see any time in our history when the police could go into the hospital and apprehend any care provider on account of having treated someone who turned out to be a suspect. And so I'm not even going to, I think we should just go from where we are and say, you know what, whatever the case may be, because in any case, the vast majority of people who present to a hospital with emergencies have either been in an accident, and when there's a crime involved, they're typically the victims of crime. And so there's no rational basis for this place where we find ourselves to have arisen at all. So I've gone past even trying to figure it out.
And I don't think it's coincidental that you're having this now, that we have to deal with COVID-19, and the health professionals are in that front line. Their role is key to how well we handle this or otherwise. But I remember earlier on where we were speaking to an official of a government, and we were bringing up questions about the third case actually calling in and saying, you know what, I need to be tested, and it took a while, according to accounts, before she was tested. And she said, you know what, we don't even have enough. I mean, we get so much calls and we don't have enough manpower. And I wonder, are you looking at the fact that some of this are as a result of a systemic failure, infrastructure issues, things that were not even provided in the first place, such that it now spiraled into what we see eventually? Are you also taking that into account?
Well, I am, but there are two things here. I mean, I don't think there's any question about our infrastructure deficits, but using a global public health emergency such as COVID-19 might not be the best possible example, because everybody's infrastructure is overwhelmed right now. I mean, Italy, as you know, the northern part of Italy has the best public health system in Europe. And as at yesterday, their real concern was this was about to explode. They already feel they've been overwhelmed, but it was about to explode. The United States, I mean, New York is going to be on lockdown momentarily. And one of the biggest issues right now is that they don't even have enough testing kits across the United States. So COVID-19 is an unusual, incredible global emergency that could be catastrophic. And so I think that trying to measure the infrastructure gap using our response to COVID-19 might be potentially problematic. And that's not to say that there's not more that can be done. I'm just saying that the gap between what is undone and what could be most ideal is something that is the case all over the world, including in China, where it started from. I mean, sanitizers and face masks and surgical masks are a problem everywhere in the world today as we speak.
The idea here is how much are you putting into consideration the fact that a lot of these issues with, for example, what happened to that lady? I mean, some people could say, for example, there was power outage. Now, that is not essentially an issue with the hospital. It's an infrastructure problem. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, okay.
Transportation, for example, bad roads and all that. So how much of that are you factoring into some of the issues consumers have on a daily?
Oh, we factor all of that. We factor all of that. But I always say that when things go wrong, regardless of why they went wrong or not, there are some things that are within the control of the responder. And primarily, let's even check what is within your control as a responder. I'll give you a quick example. Recently, there were weather problems and flights couldn't land in Lagos. Some were diverted to Abuja, some were diverted to Accra. And we pulled a major airline in to the commission for how passengers were mistreated. And my problem wasn't that the plane couldn't land in Lagos. I don't think any passenger wants a pilot to attempt to put a bird on the ground when it's not safe. But it was more of, okay, so we have an intervening problem. How did you respond to this? And everywhere in the world, you cannot, I mean, when you're providing a service or you're selling things to people, there will be the times when things don't go right. But it is what kind of systems you've built to address when those things don't go right, and how those systems hold up when things don't go right. That's the subject for us from a consumer protection standpoint. And we're not even seeking a perfection when those things go wrong. It's really about a level of responsiveness and sensitivity.
Now, let me ask you this about the same case that, had this public hearing over, and several others, like that people may have complained about. So there is an infraction, so to speak. People didn't get the kind of response or customer service or patient response that they ought to get. What happens to that institution or the officers who are supposed to provide this service and they didn't provide it? In this law, I believe you are also aware of this compulsory treatment and care for victims of gunshot law of 2017, which provides that in Section 5, that a hospital that fails to make a report as required under Section 3 is liable to conviction or a fine. In these other cases, what happens to these organizations that default?
So primarily, the FCCPC is not a prosecutor. We're not a law enforcement, criminal investigation authority, although we have the right, we have the powers to prosecute cases that have violations of law and considered criminal in the context of consumer protection. And so what I think personally is that consequence is the greatest modifier of human behavior. And so when people violate the law, let the consequence of violating the law play itself through. It's the only way to make sure that those same people don't violate the law again, and others who are watching consider their actions, or at least consider their decisions before making them. And from our side, one of the things I have done is to make sure that we have a consequence management system that prevents continuing violation of the law. I'll give you a few examples. 2018, I personally led a team to Uyo to interdict smuggled rice in the market. And for almost a year after that, we're trying to get into court. But I'm not prosecuting the case myself. I go to court myself, prosecuting, and it's most unlikely cases to be prosecuted, and people there are surprised, but I'm prosecuting it. And we just had an inquiry. And so now, one of the benefits of this inquiry is just the amount of information that came out. Here we are sitting and talking about it. And so many other care providers are going to be thinking through and say, based on what I watched on TV, based on this alone, what should we be thinking about? What should we be doing differently? And people who take patients to hospital also, just like when you did, will likely say, you know what, I'm asking you guys to do this. It looks like you guys are ignoring me. Wait until I speak with someone at the FCCPC or elsewhere. You know, and all of that. Now, but for professional discipline, if that's the point where you're going, that's not what this is about. Professional discipline in the medical profession belongs to the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria. Yeah. And so none of the things we're doing is truly to determine whether a doctor went wrong and should be penalized professionally.
That's an example, and just as you said, it's just not just about patients, but could be consumers as well. What happens? What's this consequent management that you mentioned?
All right, so I'll give you. I've given you an example of a prosecution that we're doing. Many times we penalize. Okay. All kinds of penalties. But you must remember also that in commerce, what we want to do is keep commerce moving. And so sometimes what society expects is a very strong hand. For instance, we closed up a restaurant for discriminatory conduct, and people were saying, shut that place down, never let it open again. And I'm pretty certain that if that place opens again, you would find allegations that Irukara must have taken a bribe. It was a shakedown in the first place. But that's not necessarily the right approach to consequence management in commerce, because people want that food also. It's also part of our obligations to make sure that consumers have the access to what they need. You know, and so we look at and regulators have a range of tools. Okay. And so we always find somewhere on the spectrum that we think is appropriate for the conduct.
We've got to go, but when do we expect this report?
I couldn't tell you because there's quite a lot, but I think it would be a matter of weeks. Okay. Certainly not months.
Well, we'd like to be in touch and keep that out there for people to know, because, that's why your commission is there. People should come up with this kind of things, and maybe we help you, help us.
Absolutely.
That kind of scenario. Help the people. Yeah, that's what I mean, actually. So thank you for coming on.
No, thank you.
We wish you all the best. Dr. Tunde Irukara is the Chief Executive of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, as the FCCPC. Well, back in a moment, to look at your comments. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's take a look at, yesterday we had the Ministry of Environment, Water Resources and Environment in Lagos, and some of you sent in questions, and then they put out some numbers, but we'll have to double check and just be sure it's all there. Oluyemi did ask, what is the contact number of the ministry for citizens? The response there is the contact number is 081-255-3775. Is it complete? 0810. Okay.
2553775.
Okay. So they'll just correct that bit and put it out there. But they say, look, they prefer WhatsApp, text messages so they can accommodate other people.
Well, this next one is also from Oluyemisi saying that, will the commissioner accept citizen voluntary help? She says there's quite a lot to do, and the response is that, well, it's a welcome idea. Before now, the ministry had environmental champions, and plans are afoot to resuscitate it. So apparently you can be an environmental champion. Get in touch with the ministry at that address, Block 16, Alausa, and ask for the permanent secretary's office.
Wouldn't it be nice to also contact the ministry through that same number? Anyway, Olunrin Adegoke Olawale official says, hello, sir. I stay at Koshafe local government, Oworoshoki precisely, and I can categorically tell you that we need your intervention at Okeri Street. The canals are blocked, and the landlords are not willing to open the canal. And the response of the ministry, your complaint has been noted and forwarded to the Drainage Maintenance Department for the necessary action.
All right, Shobimi Odunsi says, all the canals and drains in Lekki, Fola Shiba, for example, in VI, especially Adetokunbo, Ademola, Adjose Adogun, are blocked. They've not been cleared in ages. And then the response here is that, well, your complaints are noted and has been escalated to the appropriate department for action.
More questions from Oladele Aishat saying the drainages at Okoko are completely blocked. The water has not been flowing for years now, and nothing has been done about it. The response is necessary action will be taken on your complaint. And just to say, at the Twitter page of the ministry, and well, last tweet was 18th of February, so we might need to do more work in that area.
Ola sends in this one. Please again, try to talk about people living under the power line and people selling on the highway, roads and walkway. All these are precarious because please don't let us wait for any disasters to happen and respond with big grammar. Thank you, the ministry says. The ministry has always been engaging in advocacy, moral suasion, and enforcement as a last resort on why residents should change their ways and obey all sanitation laws without compulsion.
And then this one is from @Swish Looks, says, question is, please, there are tank farms in satellite town. We've been shouting about how unsafe it is in our environment. The same DPR gave them these licenses. And then the ministry responds saying, the state government is already engaging the DPR on the way forward, and I'm sure amicable solutions that will be acceptable to all will be reached. So there are the responses to all the questions that we were sent yesterday. So if you've got questions for anyone who were brought here, the authorities, just send them. We'll forward and get response to you because we're all here for you. Thank you for watching. We'll be here again tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Kayode Okikelu.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.